So for those who are just joining, I'll reiterate the housekeeping items. The housekeeping items are, we are going to, the chat there's down the bottom left. Everybody's muted for now, but you can put your questions in the chat. We're going to hold questions for the end. So after we do the presentation, then we'll go over everybody's questions. We'll be sharing, there's a poll, but then we'll be sharing relevant links throughout the presentation. And those will also be available to you in a follow-up email, or they're linked in our home buying handbook, which you will also get access to after this class. We're going to send out a recording of the class, and you can share that with friends, family, whoever you want. It'll be on YouTube. So, and if you can't stay for the whole thing, it is being recorded, so you will be able to watch this later. You can always contact any of us after the class to talk one-on-one. We're all available to you to discuss, and that's okay if you're just starting and you're ready to buy now, or you want to buy in 2 years, or you want to buy in 5 years. It's never too early to start planning for this process. It takes a lot of steps to get there, and I appreciate where everybody is in their process. And then the last thing I said was, if you are a Brooklyn-based small business, please reach out to us. We do a blog series specifically for women, but also any business here in Brooklyn that we can give a platform to, so that you can, and that we can give some free press to another small business here in Brooklyn, because that is very important to us, is supporting our community. So those are all my topics, my house cleaning items. So everybody should be able to leave your questions down here in the chat and be on mute. And we're going to get started because it is 5:05. I did a great job going over the housekeeping stuff. Hello, everybody. I'm Victoria Alexander. I'm the owner of Realty Collective, a boutique real estate firm. I started 16 years ago to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate agents here in New York City. I'm sure you're all very aware of those stereotypes. We're basically your coach, your therapist, and your sounding board, helping you through the emotional roller coaster of buying a piece of property in New York. So the first thing you need to do is assemble your dream team. I'm going to now hand it off and introduce my colleagues, Rashida and Lisa. And why don't, Rashida, you go first?
Hi, everyone. I see we have a great turnout this afternoon. My name is Rashida Sadiq. I'm a partner in the law firm Serpico and Sadiq PC. I have been practicing real estate law going on 18 plus years now. I represent a lot of first-time buyers. I actually pride myself on representing first-time buyers. I've represented clients from their first purchase to multiple purchases, see their families develop. I'm licensed in the tri-state area, so I can practice in both New York and New Jersey. And I look forward to giving you guys some insight in the marketplace and the legal aspects of purchasing, what you should be looking for in your purchase. So we're ready to answer some questions and look forward to a great presentation.
Okay, Lisa.
Hey everyone, my name is Lisa. I am a mortgage officer at Cross Country Mortgage. I have been in the business for about 7 or 8 years. I also really do a lot of work with first-time home buyers. It's something I really, really love doing, helping someone buy their first home. I think what makes me sort of unique is it's a very personal, individualized process with me. So I'm not just going to fit you into one thing. And I'm really excited to answer your questions. So yeah, and Victoria, I'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Lisa. So like I was saying, my name is Victoria Alexander, and I'm your real estate broker for this presentation. And my role is to be your coach. My job is to guide you through this process, give you advice based off the 16 years that I've owned this company. I've been doing real estate longer than that, but let's not talk about how old I am. At this point, I've experienced it all through that 16 years. And my job is to match you with your dream Brooklyn home and help you get to closing and home ownership. And one other thing that people should realize, that it doesn't cost anything to work with a buyer's broker. It's always factored into the cost of the seller's closing costs. And so it is in your best interest to find and select a real estate broker that you like working with. I'm going to help protect you from your own instincts to over negotiate, to be overzealous. And my job is to really simplify things for you, to calm you and avoid extra stressors through this process. I hold everything together, and all the moving pieces that happen for this process, and work with Lisa and Rashida so that we're a great team to make sure that you get across the finish line with the least amount of stress as possible. And like I said, my services don't cost to the buyer, and I get paid by the seller's agent. And then these are the three people you need to start this process. You need a real estate attorney. You want a local real estate attorney that's practicing in New York City, that has a history of practicing here, that knows the other lawyers, so that when I send out a deal sheet, you're like, oh, this Rashida and this person, and they already have to, oh, great to work with you again. Those are the people you want on your deal. Same thing with your mortgage professional. Having a buyer's agent is important to you also because we have a fiduciary responsibility to you. When you walk into a property, the seller broker has a responsibility to the seller and not to you. And as an unrepresented buyer, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage to the negotiating process and possibly not getting a fair deal because you aren't getting the guidance that you probably need to get through this process. I always say to interview these people, interview your team, make sure you feel comfortable with them and they can answer all your questions. Their job, all three of our job is to guide you. So we want to make sure that we're available, that you feel confident in the information that we're giving you, and that you feel comfortable listening to our advice. If you can't take advice from us, then you probably shouldn't be working together, because that's the whole point. We're your trusted advisors to get you across the finish line. And that's why I'm saying that personality type is important too, because you want to spend a lot of time with this person. You want to like them and trust them. I think those are all my notes. Pick your advisors that have relationships with the industry, and don't hire your uncle. That has happened. So I say that in jest, but it has happened where people are like, I want my uncle to be my real estate lawyer. And that person is going to probably have not the best advice for you if they are not somebody that's doing some specific New York City real estate. If your uncle's doing divorce law, is not the same. You want somebody with these expertise to guide you through this process. Okay, so we did the dream team. Next slide. First slide. Why buy now? The rent's too high. You have to do your own investment, your own design, long-term investment, and equity. You are paying in New York City, you are paying a mortgage no matter what you're doing. Either you're paying your own mortgage or you're paying your landlord's mortgage. And all you're doing is building equity and wealth for somebody else if you're renting right now. And if you plan on staying in New York City, I encourage you to buy, figure out a way to buy. And now is such an amazing time to buy because the cost of buying and renting has never been closer. So if you're spending $4,000 a month on rent, you should be spending $4,000 a month on buying. Next slide. We use this thing and I send it to all my clients called the Rent versus Buy Matrix from the New York Times. You guys can Google it and find it, but we're going to put the link in the chat, and you can put all your different parameters. And, if you're in a rent stabilized or rent controlled apartment, maybe buying is not for you. But this calculator really helps you figure out what those numbers are and if buying is right for you right now. And the other point on that is always say is like, you need to be able to stay in your apartment for 5 years or hold on to owning this apartment for at least 5 years. Okay, so your team is assembled. Next slide. You've got your attorney, you've got your mortgage professional, and you have your real estate, your buyer's broker. Those are the three people you need to start. Other people you may need is a contractor, an architect, an inspector. We're going to help you find these people if you don't have them already. We have trusted people that we've worked with over the years. And so you don't need to stress so much about those people. But the three people you really need to find are the attorney, the mortgage professional, and the real estate broker. So now that you've decided to buy, you have these three people. You can move forward, and this is what happens next. You call your mortgage professional, because the first thing you want to do is get pre-approved. And Lisa, why don't you start talking about that?
Thanks. So it's really important that, when you're starting the process, the first thing you need to do is get pre-approved. And the reason you do is because you want to know how much you can get a loan for. You want to use that as one of your important tools in figuring out your budget. You don't want to waste time looking at things that are over your budget because that's not fair and no fun. And you also don't want to undercut yourself by thinking, oh, this is how much I can afford when maybe you can afford more. So you're going to talk to me or mortgage professional to get you pre-approved. And what I really pride myself on and what my team is really great on is it's a very individual process. I'm going to have a conversation with you. I'm going to figure out what you're looking for. I'm going to figure out what your job employment is, how much you want to spend, what you think you want your monthly payment to be. And then with that information, I'm going to get some documents for you and I'm going to get you pre-approved. That pre-approval is really a working draft. Okay. As you go out and see things with Victoria, you will start to have a better idea of what you're looking for. Throughout the process, you just, shoot me an email or give me a call, say, hey, Lisa, I know I was thinking about a condo, but actually I'm really loving these co-ops. Can you give me some numbers for that? And I'm happy to do so. Why the process is so individual is because I have a whole bunch of different products to figure out what is the right one for you. So you can put 10% down. In some cases, you can put 5% down, 3.5% down if you go FHA, or the conventional 20% down. It's different if it's a co-op versus if it's a single or multifamily. So there's a lot of sort of information to figure out how long you want to live in the property. Is an ARM the best way to go for you? Or with rates being so low right now, do you want to stay with the 30-year? These are the kind of questions that we will sort of discuss to figure out sort of what is the right mortgage for you. After I get you that pre-approval, as I said, it's really a working draft. So when you as you get a better idea of what you're really looking for, we will sort of get that pre-approval nailed down to what it is for when you find the right place to put an offer on.
The other things that I think is really important to talk to Lisa about, if you own your own business, talking to her about your taxes, there are things you can do to make yourself look better to banks, and overcoming those challenges of being self-employed is something I've personally had to deal with. So I think it's really great, no matter where you are in the process, is talking to a mortgage professional, specifically.
That is so
Lisa.
great, Victoria. And actually, if you're self-employed, it's better to start like sooner rather than later, because we might have a conversation now that will be very important as you prepare your tax returns for this year. So for all of my self-employed borrowers, I say, talk to me before you file your taxes for the year, because that's going to be a crucial element of getting you pre-approved. And there are a lot of options available. It's really just about the history of your business.
That's one of the deals we're working on right now and overcoming that challenge. But the other thing that I also like to tell people about picking a mortgage professional is, in New York City, do not pick Rocket Mortgage, Quicken. They're all of those platforms. They are not built for New York, the very complex New York City market. They don't know how to deal with co-ops. Just steer clear of them. I know that I want to say how amazing Lisa is, and working with her has been great. So great for me and my clients, and I encourage you to speak with her. But what I can say of absolutely who not to speak to is any of those online platforms that just are not prepared for the nuances of New York City real estate. So that should be your biggest takeaway in that arena.
As you're interviewing, Victoria was talking about interviewing people. Some of the questions you really need to ask is, at this point, talking about the pre-approval, is, do you work with first-time home buyers? Do you work with self-employed? How do you calculate self-employed income? If they tell you, oh, we always use the 2-year average tax returns, they're not really using all of the options available. Do they know co-ops? Because Rashida, Victoria, and I work on a lot of co-ops together. It is a different kettle of fish. If they don't know how to do co-ops, if they don't understand them, if they treat them just like a condo or a single family home, that's going to be a real problem for you. And 100% look at their website and their Yelp reviews and stuff like that. See how many people they're working with in New York City. Because if they're not working with a lot of people in New York City, then they might not be the best partnership for you, because, New York is totally different than the rest of the country. In terms of, I have property in Philadelphia and California, other places. It's totally different in New York. So you really need to have a New York team in order to get the job done as quickly as possible.
And Jess, can I step in as well as an attorney that represents like several buyers and deals with a multiple of different lenders in these various transactions? Definitely speak with your attorney as well and ask them, what is your take on these on the lenders? Do they get to, how quickly are they responsive? Are they able to get us to a closing date within the time period? Because as Victoria says, one of the things when I speak to clients, I ask them who you're working with as your lender. And if they tell me certain banks, I'm just like, okay, your time period for getting your commitment is going to be the full time period, and there may be delays. And 9 times out of 10, it's accurate because I just know their kind of like backlog, how their underwriting takes time, and just their nuances for those particular banks. So it's also very important when you're speaking to your attorney to see if they have any, suggestions or, dealt with certain banks in the past in recent as well, especially during these times.
I know Rashida doesn't want to say it, but Wells Fargo takes forever. They take forever. So just be aware of that.
Actually, it's Bank of America.
I've done one deal with Bank of America. It was with you guys, with you last year, Rashida, and my client said never again after that process.
Yeah,
and I was
Bank of America is the bane of my existence.
Good to know. That's the only deal. I did one deal in January for Bank of America. Thankfully, everybody else speaks with Lisa or you're just not going to get the same access to products too if you're just working with the bank. So my only encouragement to work with the bank would be if you have enough cash that you're getting access to interest rates that for private lending. My one client last year who had Wells Fargo, he insisted on using them because he was getting an incredible rate that Lisa and I'm sure nobody else could have given him because he had so many other assets there. And that's the only scenario where I'm encouraging people to go directly to their bank if they have those sort of funds and means accessible to them. But other than that, the amount of products that are available to you are going to be really limited if you just go to the bank. So that's why it's always important to talk to somebody that's focusing on mortgages and a mortgage professional. So now that we've talked about all those things, and don't start on StreetEasy. You start by talking to somebody about how much you can actually afford. Just because you have 20% down doesn't mean you can afford 20% of whatever your savings are. You need to calculate in closing costs, take in your income and your credit score. There's lots of things that go into this. And there's a link in the chat that Farah posted about questions that your mortgage professional is going to ask you. So just be prepared to discuss those things to help you get qualified. So I know the street is exciting, but that's not the first step, even though it's pretty. So next slide, where do you search? The internet's changed everything. And so, looking on StreetEasy is totally fine. New York City does not have an MLS. REBNY, which is the Real Estate Board of New York, which is an organization that holds a certain level of ethics for all brokers that are part of it, has decided to create its own MLS, which is multiple listing service, but it is not launching till spring of 2022. So, but all of your brokers have access to one platform, the RLS, that disseminates this information. You as a consumer just do not have access to the MLS. So StreetEasy, Trulia, Zillow, the problem is it's not all of the information in one place. Some of my clients use realtor.com and some of the information is not correct. Like on Zillow all the time, I'll see co-ops advertised as condos. The taxes are entered incorrectly. And the information is it's in contract, but Zillow is not telling us it's in contract. My client's like, why is it still available, saying it's still available? It's because the public view of the information is just not as transparent from a consumer perspective that we would like it to be. So we'll set up a search for you. We'll aggregate all this information and send it to you and then organize all of the showings. The days are over for those off-market listings. What happens now is agents that have relationships that we've worked with will send a coming soon email or know that that you work aggressively in a certain neighborhood or area, and we'll send you, hey, I'm about to relist this. I had a client that wrote to me, the broker that wrote to me last week and said, I didn't list this apartment. It's going to come online in 2 days. Your client that didn't get that other listing that I had, would they be interested in it? My client had an accepted offer on another property. but wanted to see it. The broker got her in early before the open house because she knew what a qualified buyer she was. And I had that relationship with her and knew that we would close a great deal together if it got accepted. And that's still in the works. Hopefully there'll be a happy ending. But those are the kind of why you want to work with a real estate broker that has those sort of relationships. When you're interviewing people, you want somebody that has a proven historic track record, not that they've been doing real estate for a year or two. If they're doing real estate for a year or two, you want to make sure they're on a team because that you need that advice from as a new agent from somebody with a little bit more experience. I keep sidetracking. So the off-market stuff doesn't really happen anymore. Keep in mind that seller agents represent the financial best interests of the sellers, not buyers. So when you walk into a property, that person is there representing the seller and their best interest of the seller. And some people think that they can streamline things by just working with that agent, but in reality, they don't have your best interest at heart, and you can end up losing the property or money. A buyer broker represents you, the buyer, and your best interest, even though we get paid by the seller. These costs are included in your closing costs on either side of the transaction, whether you're a buyer or a seller. So anybody have any other suggestions on where you search besides realtor.com, Trulia, Zillow, Street Easy? Am I missing anything that's anybody use Localize? Google, interesting. You know, I should look back and see what the buyer, like how it looks to buyers on Google, because I actually don't know what that looks like. Are you finding Google helpful? No, I'm sorry. But that's why we have a backend MLS. We can set up a search for you and listings will come direct from you from the MLS to you. It's still not perfect. I know that it's really like, that's one of the most frustrating things for all of my buyers is where is the one platform that can put all the listings in the one place for you? And it just is not existing right now. So next slide, finding your dream home. So things that most people just think about: location, type, amenities, and site. So what do these things mean? Neighborhood, right? Location is neighborhood, close to proximity to subways. The type of property, condo or co-op or house or multifamily, single family, multifamily. Amenities are subways and amenity. Being close to a park, washer, dryer, dishwasher, doorman, porter, live-in super, roof deck, access to outdoor space, in gym inside the building. Now karaoke room in some places. My clients are buying an apartment in Gowanus that has 2 karaoke rooms, a yoga room, and some other crazy amenities, because since a lot of more people from Manhattan are moving to Brooklyn, just in the last couple of years, there's been this emergence of luxury amenity buildings that have all these services provided inside the building. I'm going to send, I think Farah probably already put it in there, a quick link to the types of housing you might see in New York, understanding pre-war, post-war, new construction. It's not just co-ops and condos. There's a lot of variables to these things. Thinking about building typology, what amenities you want. A doorman. If you want to live in Williamsburg, you're probably not living in a pre-war co-op that has a doorman. Pre-war co-ops is usually the MO for a doorman. So neighborhoods are Brooklyn Heights, Prospect Heights, Park Slope. Park Slope, less doorman, but more pre-war co-ops. If you wanted to live in Williamsburg, you'd probably have to live in new construction and wouldn't be able to find a co-op. I always tell people to make their list of 5 deal breakers and then realize you're probably only going to get 2 or 3 of them, sadly. Unless you're a multimillionaire, you're really not going to be in a position to get everything on your bucket list. The other part of the thinking about finding your home is thinking about closing costs. If you are looking for a co-op, your closing costs are going to be 1 to 3%, average about $4,000 or $5,000. And for condos, it's about 3 to 5%. New construction is only in condos, and there are a lot of fees usually associated with buying new construction, including transfer taxes. So other things to consider, like you're going to have to build everything out. The closets aren't going to have custom racks and everything in it. You're gonna have to put the toilet paper holder on the wall sometimes. Like new construction just comes with not the investment of somebody already living there, and addressing some of the things that you're gonna have to do yourself. And sellers also have closing costs, about 8% for the transaction. Next slide. So making an offer. I cannot stress enough to be ready for putting in an offer. I always tell there's 3 documents that I make everybody get together once they start looking. So if you're looking at property, you should have these 3 things ready to go. So if you find that dream home on Sunday at the open house, you're gonna be able to submit your offer on the same day. Cannot stress enough how important it is to get your offer in right away, showing the seller that you are serious and that you are confident in your decision. So the 3 documents are your pre-approval. That's why you need to talk to Lisa. You need something called a revenue submit offer form, which shows your income, your assets, and any debt that you're carrying, and your offer terms. Your offers contingent on financing, your offers contingent on inspection, and then a cover letter. Cover letter, hands down, is super important, especially when everything's so competitive these days. You need to do something to stand out to people. If everybody's doing a cover letter, got to put a picture of yourself on it, other ways to show that, you're serious and can stand out from the other offers besides being, the most expensive offer or the highest offer. One of the main resources that for working with a buyer's agent provides a relationship and knowledge of other agents. So that's why it's important when you're interviewing people to make sure that they have been working in the specific neighborhood and industry area that you're looking in. I know a lot of people do this, and sadly, like I'm working with a client now who ended up hiring someone who was referred to them from Manhattan. Broker thought they could do Manhattan, but all of their offers they weren't getting responses from. She sadly had to break up that relationship and is now working with me. She's like, you know that broker? Oh, you know that broker? And I'm calling and being able to ask questions and putting in offers and getting responses because I have a history of working with these brokers and closing deals with them. And they know what it's like to be on a deal with me. So make sure that your broker that you pick to work with also has that sort of expertise and neighborhood knowledge and not knowing other brokers. And then understand. So when you're also, the other thing to think about when you're making an offer is trying to understand the seller's negotiation strategy and creating your own negotiation strategy. And you're going to work with your real estate agent to come up with a negotiating strategy. Are you going to come in, over ask right out the gate, or are you going to wait for them to come back with best and final? This is something before I put an offer in, I always call the other agent, make sure I reintroduce myself if I don't know them, but then ask them how have they prepared the seller to respond to offers? Are they going to do best and final? Are they going to respond to everybody individually, or they just accept the person that looks most qualified? Because then I will help guide us into how we should come out the gate aggressively, or should we wait and see what the best and final scenario is, so that we buy ourselves some time to gain more information to help guide us through this process. Because I can get on the phone with the other broker a couple of times, and each time they give me a little bit of more information and tidbit to help us create our negotiating strategy. I think that's a super important part of this process. Everything needs to be negotiated before an offer is accepted, and be prepared to be submitted to lawyers on the deal sheet. The contract terms are different from the deal terms, and understanding if your offer is contingent on financing, contingent on inspection, what happens at the inspection, and what is an as-is sale. I'm going to let Rashida talk about and then pass to Lisa.
So now that you found your property, as Victoria said, it moves pretty quickly. I tell clients it's kind of like a roller coaster. You found it, now you're at the beginning of the line, and they're giving your attorney's information, and they're sending out the contract to your attorney, and the terms have been negotiated for the most part. Until the contract is signed, one very important thing, well, lots of very important things, but until the contract is signed by both parties, either side can back out of the transaction. So even though your offer has been accepted, if something changes, you're still not bound until you sign that contract and the seller signs it and your down payment is received. So just to always give kind of clients a little bit of, in the midst of, making this important decision, you realize that you do have a chance to make changes until that contract is signed. So a couple of things that definitely you want to have in your offer is mortgage contingency if you're getting a mortgage. I know there are certain times when people negotiate for taking out the mortgage contingency or taking out an appraisal contingency. But if you're taking something like that out of your contract, you want to definitely have a conversation with your realtor and 100% have a conversation with your attorney so they can explain to you what that means towards your down payment. That means that if you don't have a mortgage contingency, if you're not able to get your loan, your down payment can be at risk. If there's no appraisal contingency and the property doesn't appraise and you can't come up with the extra funds, then your down payment is at risk. And remember, this down payment deposit you've been saving for lots of years, and it's a lot of funds that you don't want to lose. So you want to make sure that you understand the terms of the contract in where you get back your down payment if something falls through. So one of the major, as I said, is mortgage contingency. If you're purchasing a co-op, then there's approval by the co-op as a second contingency. And whether it's a house, a condo, or a co-op, there's something that we call is either a lien search or a title search that's done on the premises. And that's to make sure that the seller has the right to sell you the property, that there's no judgments or liens or mortgages or anything that on the property. And all contracts have that contingency because they have to give you good title to the property. Things that happen prior to you signing the contract is an inspection. So some realtors don't do inspections, some might do, whether it's a co-op or a condo, there's kind of conversations on whether you want to do an inspection or not. If it's a house, 100% you're doing your inspection. But an inspection happens prior to you signing the contract. So your offer is accepted. First thing you should be doing is getting your inspection completed, because while your attorney is reviewing the contract and making sure those other terms are in the contract states, as is condition, you've done your inspection or you've waived your inspection to the property. And what that means is, let's say there's a broken window or the air conditioner unit isn't working. If it wasn't working when you saw the property and when you entered into contract, that's as is. It doesn't have to be in working order on the day of the closing. Otherwise, there's a provision in the contract that says plumbing, electrical systems, appliances in working order as of the date hereof. And hereof means as of the date you entered into contract. So important that you understand those terms. And as I said, if we do your inspection and something comes up, there's, the electrical outlets are outdated or the plumbing is outdated, there's a leak. Now you can go back and renegotiate and say, hey, we want the seller to fix these items, or we want the seller to give us a credit and we'll take care of that. But all of that has to happen before you sign that contract, because once it's signed, it's binding and you're bound by those terms that are in that contract of sale.
And then Lisa, do you have anything to talk about during the due diligence process for getting the offer in before we get into contract?
Well, just the one thing I'll say in terms of the offer in is, it's really important that, when I do your pre-approval, I'm going to get documents from you to make sure that the deal works with the income and all that stuff that you have. That's just not to make sure on my end that there are no surprises with the mortgage. That actually also helps you on the offer, because a lot of times when Victoria puts in your offer, particularly in this environment, the seller's agent's going to call me and they're going to be like, hey, I just got a pre-approval from Victoria for a home for Rashida. Tell me about the pre-approval. What does her income look like? And if I have those numbers, I can say her income's awesome. This is, I crunched this. This is what her DTI is. Basically, I can tell him that this is a real pre-approval. This isn't BS. And that's going to help you when you do the offer, because the seller wants to make sure that we're not going to have any issues with mortgage. So that's just another piece of the puzzle as you do your due diligence to get that offer in. That's really important.
I think that people forget though too, and I like to just remind that they're screening us to make sure, especially in a co-op scenario, to make sure you can actually close. So it's not like you're just giving you the highest and best number and they're running with it. They need to vet you. If I'm selling a co-op, I'm Googling the buyer. I am double checking all of their paperwork and making sure that the board that I am familiar with, hopefully at the building, is going to pass them. Are they getting a gift? And is that going to be a red flag for this board? Is somebody buying this as a pied a terre? Are they buying it? Is their parents buying it for their child? There's lots of things when as a seller's broker, you're vetting buyers for the property. So understanding, is this board going to pass them? Do they have enough money in the bank after the closing to, like, most co-op boards want 6 months to a year to show that you have liquid after the closing. So you can't empty your bank accounts on your down payment, on your closing costs. You need to have some buffer there. So because they don't want to take a risk and you lose your job right after you buy the house, and then you can't pay your maintenance to the building, who needs that money to pay the porter, to pay the doorman, to pay the people they have on staff and upkeep the building. So you're making an investment into their business and their home and you're by this purchase. And so they're vetting you to make sure that you're not a risk by accepting your offer and accepting you into their building. And that's part of the board package process. So going on, then I think next slide is Rashida, you want to talk a little bit about the inspection, and then we can do getting into contract?
Yeah, guess they said the inspection is done prior to signing the contract. So you'll do that with your realtor may be present, but definitely you should be there with the inspector, and they'll point out things to you. They'll sometimes send a copy of the inspection report to the attorney. So if we have to go back and give items to the seller, we can send them a copy of the report. And all of that is done prior to you signing. So now that you've done your inspection, worked out any credits or repairs that the seller is going to do, now we incorporate that into the contract of sale as either a separate rider, which we call as a repair rider, or we put into the contract if there's going to be a credit. So getting you into contract, it depends on what type of property. So if you're looking at a co-op or a condo, first, your attorney has to do what we call as attorney due diligence. I tell clients, you love the unit, you saw it, you're great, you fell in love with it. However, you are buying into a building, into a corporation, into a condo association. So you want to make sure whether there is litigation, is there a history of maintenance increases? What is going to be my financial obligations? Are there assessments coming up? Is there a noisy neighbor that they complain about? What is their house rules? Are there pets allowed? So all of those things now have to be determined or found out during that attorney due diligence. So we're reviewing the offering plan, the financials, the house rules, the application, the board meeting minutes. We send over questionnaires to the management company because we want to get as much information as possible so that you know what type of building you're buying into. We can't always get 100%, but at least we get to the most that we can, at least give you as much information going in. That due diligence can take anywhere from a week, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the building. I have one right now where it's a building and they're transitioning management companies and they're just not responding to me anymore. And it's going on 2 weeks. And it's like, I can't get anything done. I mean, everything, the attorneys are done with I can't finish that due diligence. The sellers in California doesn't have a relationship with the management company. The outgoing one is mad. The incoming one doesn't care. And we're just trying to get as much information as possible to get them for that due diligence. But relatively, as I said, the management companies will get us that information. And once we've completed that due diligence, I can speak with the clients and give them an overview on what I think about that building and kind of the things that come up that you should be aware of. For a house, you don't have due diligence. It's really just about getting your inspection. Myself, as an attorney, I like to look up the property and look up to see if there's any violations or open permits. That will happen with your title company after you get into contract. But my rule of thumb is let's be preventative versus reactive and have this information going in. So if you know there's a violation that the seller is going to take 90 days to cure and your closing says 60 days, now you already have that going in and the seller has already that information to start working on it right away. So those are things that even before you sign the contract, as you get into contract, your attorney wants to do with their due diligence. Reviewing the contract, we send over what we call either a buyer's rider or a seller's rider. We negotiate the terms, make sure that it's, fairly fair for both parties. The seller wants to take some, the buyer wants to take some, but we try to get there to make sure that both parties are protected. And then once due diligence is finished, contracts are finalized, then I meet with the clients to go over everything and sign. And during that due diligence period, you're getting updates on what's going on as well. So that contract, like that roller coaster, you put in your offer and you're in contract within about a week or so. and giving that down payment of something you've probably been looking around for like maybe a year. And all of a sudden it's now this big decision. You're turning over this check or wiring that 10%. So it happens pretty quickly.
Usually once you have an accepted offer, that the expectation from the sell side is that you're signing the contract within a week. And that's like sometimes extended to the next week over, but generally that's when they're going to start applying pressure and saying, oh, we're going to hold another open house, or oh, we're getting backup offers, and motivate you to sign the contract and make a decision and lock you in. But that's why you want to have a good team that moves quickly, that's going to do all the research and due diligence process to make sure that you feel confident in this decision, to give them that down payment money. And down payment at contract signing is usually 10%, can be negotiated to be 5%, but I would say rule of thumb is 10, right, Rashida?
Yeah, typically the majority is 10%, but as I said, it can be negotiated to less than 10%, 5%, sometimes even 3.5%, depending on the type of mortgage you're getting as well.
And during this contract time, that's when also talks about like the closing date and timelines around the expectations.
Yes, exactly.
And that's different between condo and co-ops, right?
Yeah, so we'll definitely be going over those time periods. Typically for your contract, you're having for a mortgage, 30 to 45 days. For a regular house transaction, you're looking at about a 60-day transaction for closing. For a condo, typically also 60 days. For a co-op, because you have this third kind of party that has to do the approval after you get your mortgage, I would say most co-ops are roughly about a 90-day closing. We put order about 60 days, but realistically it can be pushed into 90 days, depending on how quickly you get your mortgage, get to the board, and then get approval and closing. So the time periods are very important. The main first time period you always want to make sure you're aware of is that mortgage contingency time period.
That's why it's super important when after you sign the contract, then you're checking in with Lisa and making sure she has all the paperwork she needs from you. And then she's going to reach out to the building and the other pros on the deal to make sure that she's gathering as much information. We have a deal right now. The building has some litigation going on. We had to track down some people. You want to make sure that they have all the information first. If you're doing a co-op, then we start working on your board package. But that we can't submit your board package usually until your commitment is in. The management company wants it and the board want it, and your lawyer is going to say not to submit it until Rashida is going to say, because she said it to me, don't submit the board package till we have the commitment, because then it jeopardizes your financing contingency. And so there's all these different nuances that you just need to be aware of, but people that are going, and then have the right people to guide you through the process. So you understand this now, and now you've signed the contract, you've given your deposit, and now you're in contract. This is where the heavy lifting of the attorney and the mortgage professional comes in. And I'm going to, if you're in a co-op situation or a condo that provides an application, work to create a beautiful co-op or condo application for you and with you. And that can now be submitted digitally for some co-ops, and some people still want an paper bound 100-something odd page pamphlet with all of your life in it. It's going to feel very intrusive, but it's not you, it's everyone. They want to vet scrupulously that you are a good person to live in their building. And then if you get past the review of the paperwork version, then you get to do an in-person interview where they will, depending on the board, can be very easygoing, or could be really aggressive about making sure that you're, some of them pull out the co-op package and go on line 13 and like, do you know how many shares you're buying? And do you know what your co-op maintenance covers? They might make it hard for you, but being prepared by the right team members is going to help you overcome those parts of the process. Then I'm going to hand it over to Lisa to talk about the due diligence, the turn times, underwriting, and locking your rate.
Right. So this is
hey Lisa, it's Tina from Realty Collective. Just before you get into that, just to make clear, that kind of interview process is what happens in a co-op. It doesn't happen with a condo, even if the condo has an application.
Right. Sorry. There's a lot of information that we're trying to squeeze in.
I know. I just want to make sure that people understand that difference between the co-op and the condo when it comes to an interview.
Right. Yeah. There's only an interview with co-op. Even some condos do have an application process, but don't have an interview process. Sorry, Lisa, go ahead. Take it away.
No worries. So to summarize, Victoria, Tina found you the awesome place. Rashida got you an amazing terms of contract. Now you have a fully executed contract. This is not coming as a surprise to me because you've given me all the documents beforehand. You've let me know that we have an accepted offer. I've been working away. So as soon as we have those fully executed contracts, this becomes what is called a live deal. That means my team orders the appraisal. We get you initial disclosures to sign. And basically what we're working on is getting your file all ready so that it can go into underwriting as quickly as possible. And honestly, this is where my team just knocks it out of the park. We work incredibly efficiently and incredibly quickly. So the longest part of the process with us, this is not with every bank, is honestly going to be waiting for the appraisal to come in. Appraisers just industry wide are really backed up still because everyone's buying because rates are awesome. So, but that's okay because we work so fast that we'll have everything ready so that once that appraisal comes in, we get you into underwriting. Why this is so important for you is because, like Victoria mentioned, if you're looking at a co-op, they're not even going to look at your application without the commitment letter. So if it takes them 2 weeks, which would be fast, to review a board application, that is not going to happen until you have the mortgage commitment letter so you can finish your package. So that's one of the things that's really important if you do a co-op. If you do a condo or a single family home, it's still really important because you just want to get through the process as quickly and as painlessly as possible. And having quick underwriting turn times is going to make that happen. The other thing that's just sort of really cool about our process, one of the reasons we're so fast, is because it's very, like I said at the beginning, really personalized. So like, I actually know my underwriter. My underwriter knows me. I know how my underwriter thinks. She knows how I think. So we are able to work through problems of a file and figure it out in a way that makes it work for the loan that you need, rather than just some, file number 532 that, nope, not going to work situation. So so then it all goes through, you get your approval. I send you an email. I'm like, woohoo, we got the approval. If it's a co-op, you're going to get that board interview so that we can start understanding the timeline of the co-op of when we're going to close. If you don't need an interview, then we're going to start working on those final conditions. Usually it's like homeowners insurance and a few other little things to get you in the clear to close process. In terms of rate, everyone always wants to know about rate. So rates are great. They started to go up a little bit, but they're still, in the low threes, which is amazing. This is for a 30-year. But rate is something that you need to do it at the right time. So, at the beginning of the process, it really is honestly sort of a placeholder, depending on what you're going to buy, whether you're going to buy a co-op or a condo or a single family home. And then it's a matter of figuring out the right time to lock, because once you lock, you are on a time clock. So if you don't close before that lock expires, you have to pay an extension fee, and they can get really expensive really fast. So like Rashida mentioned, a co-op can take 90 days to close. A lot can happen with rate in 90 days. So what I tell everyone is my team's job is to get you through underwriting as fast as possible. And they are freaking awesome at that. And my job is to get you the best rate possible. And I'm really good at that too. So it will be a conversation that we have in terms of figuring out the best time to do that. But yeah, then you get the clear to close, which basically means that things are looking good, and Rashida can work with the attorneys to get to the closing table.
Before I pass it over to Rashida, I'm also going to just ask you to talk about the difference I know that my clients are always asking me that, like, oh, wait, when should I lock? Like, oh, Lisa's giving me this rate. What do you think? And I agree, like, you're not going to get locked into the rate until if the best one is available to you based on the product. And some of that product is based on if you're buying with a jumbo loan or not. And so can you talk to a little bit about that?
100%. So a jumbo loan it basically means it's a bigger mortgage. Okay. It's a bigger loan, which basically means if you're borrowing more money, then there are more guidelines and more restrictions in terms of what you can do because the bank is taking a bigger risk. So in New York, a jumbo loan for a 1 unit is over 822. So that means if the loan amount is over 822, it's considered a jumbo loan. A jumbo loan has, more stringent guidelines, particularly related to some things like self-employment and things like that. So it's really important if you look at that loan amount for us to, again, through the pre-approval process to make sure it'll work. In terms of rate, rate will change based on if it's a conventional loan or a jumbo loan. It'll also change based on if you're putting 20% down or 10% down or 25% down. It'll also change depending on how much money you make and how much debt you have. Debt to income ratio is basically the housing payment plus your debt divided by your income. So that also affects rate. So if you're self-employed, I actually have a borrower right now that is self-employed, that the deal only works with 1 year tax returns. It does not work with 2. That means he can only do a specific product because that product allows 1 year tax returns. That affects the rate. But you know what? He's getting the house he wants with his tax returns as they are, and the rate difference is like 0.125. So those are the kind of conversations we'll have. So rate is like everything in the mortgage process. It's actually a lot more individual than you think, which is actually one of the reasons why I like my job, because it's about you and your loan rather than just, what rate is. But does that answer your question, Victoria?
Yeah, definitely. I just want people to understand,
Sure.
because my clients now, they're needing a lot of guidance on that right now. So I'm glad that we clarified, because I'm sure everybody on this call also needs to understand what that is. So Rashida, you're in contract. Tell us about the due diligence that happens in contract, the Aztec agreements, and anything else we'd want to know.
So now you're in contract. You have these time periods that are ticking along. 30 days to get your mortgage. Your closing date is 60 days. And it's, running simultaneously. So your main focus, I tell clients, is with your mortgage. Everything else your attorney will do on the background. Your realtor will help you with the co-op application. So as an attorney, the first thing we're doing is ordering that lien search if it's a co-op and that title search if it's a house or a condo. And the searches are to make sure that there's no issues with open mortgages, judgments, tax liens, anything that can prevent the seller from selling you that property. And that search can take for a co-op is relatively quickly. You get that search, it calls a lien search within 24 to 48 hours. For a house or a condo, that search can take a little bit longer. So typically about 1 to 2 weeks, because they have to do certain things like surveys, and they have to go down to the Department of Buildings, and they have to actually pull the records for certain properties. So once that search comes in, your attorney has to review it and make sure that if there's any problems that the seller has to take care of, that is taken care of within that time period of that 60 days. Now, if there's an issue like a violation, or if there's an open mortgage from a prior owner, or there's a federal tax lien, those things can take time. So even though you're working on your mortgage and you're getting your mortgage simultaneously, your attorney's in the background working with the seller side to hopefully get those items done within that time period as well. And that's why I also say it's important when you're talking about rates, because your contract has this term in New York called on or about. So it's, on or about means an extra 30-day grace period. So don't get tied down to 60 days. I'm closing on December 6th, even though my contract says on or about December 6th. You may not close on December 6th. So your rate should go past December 6th. I have like 5 contracts right now, not with you, Lisa. And every single one of those rates, their rate locks are expiring a week before the closing date, even in the contract. And I'm just like, what? And all of them have issues that I'm just like, the seller is clearing up violations. Why did you lock in your rate? Not even to give me a little bit something to work with. It's before the closing date. And that's, yeah, when you work with a loan officer that doesn't know what they're doing, or they don't take the time to read a contract, this is what happens. So your attorney, I'm trying to fight with not fight, but trying to get the seller to move quicker. And they're like, hey, it's on or about time. We have the time period to clear up these title issues that we're working with, and I can't do anything. And unfortunately, they're going to have to extend their rate. So those are things that we're doing in the background regarding the contract of sale and making sure you're getting good title to the property. If it's a co-op, we're making sure that the bank attorney, which is going to be assigned to the transaction as well, is getting the documents they need. They need to get what we call recognition agreements from the lender, so they can put that into your application. They also have to get the title report because they have to review it as well. They want to get information from the realtor so they can put that in the closing disclosure. So there's a lot going on that you may not know about in the background, but it's going on in the background that we're taking care of. But your main focus is the mortgage commitment and getting those items together, and then working with the realtor with the next step if you get in a co-op or a condo, if that condo building requires an application to get those items, and everything else your attorney will work on in the background.
So much information, guys, and we're trying to keep
Yes.
it under the hour. I'm so sorry. But also really great questions. So we're trying to address them as we're going. So you get through the in-contract period and the due diligence period, and you've got the clear to close from the bank and your lawyer. Then the lawyers will work together to schedule the closing. Do you want to talk about that? The other thing that happens is we do the final walkthrough and inspect the property to make sure that it's being delivered as presented in the contract. But Rashida, talk about scheduling the closing and then what happens at closing. Yeah, so scheduling the closing, this is when I become a juggler because now I have to coordinate with all the different parties. I mean, we're now back to actually having in-person closings. So for a co-op, I had one this morning, and there were about 7 to 8 different parties that I had to make sure was available on the same day at the same time and for the same amount of hours. So just going back and forth, as I said, I become a juggler. We have semi-remote closings where the seller pre-signs all the documents, sends the documents to the buyer's attorney, and then I coordinate with the title company or the co-op, and we get everything done so they don't attend it in person. So that whole process of closing is, as I said, a juggling act. One thing I always speak to the client: when is your availability? Give me multiple times and dates so that I don't have to keep on going back and forth. And you have to be flexible for closings. Closings are done only during the week. They're not done on weekends and during business hours. And because wires have to take place or bank checks have to get done or funding approval, typically closings start from maybe 10 a.m. and the last closing would maybe be 3:30 for the latest, 4 o'clock very rarely, but could be potentially if I'm depending on it. But typically you're looking at 10 a.m. for the earliest for a closing, 3:30 for the latest, especially if you're looking at a co-op, because they want to make sure that they get funding approval and all of these things that happens during your closing. Your closing day is actually, the closing itself is roughly about an hour to 2 hours for the closing. And you're signing documents for roughly about half an hour to 45 minutes. Your attorney is going through all of those items. Then you're waiting for the bank to approve certain documents finally at the closing, and then exchanging and getting the keys. Prior to the closing, which is a very important step, is your walkthrough, because you want to make sure you do your walkthrough with your realtor, because I always tell clients, when you get those keys, you're now the owner. So you can't call me the next day and say, hey, Rashida, I forgot to check that air conditioning unit and I checked it now and it's not working. You got the keys. It wasn't brought up prior to your closing. It's now your responsibility. So very important that you coordinate with the realtor, you do that walkthrough, you make sure it's thorough. And if there's any issues, you notify the attorney right away so we can work out any issues prior to you actually closing on that day of the closing. And then
the one thing I would add.
Oh no, Lisa, go ahead, Lisa.
The one that Rashida forgot to mention, but we both know this. Do not schedule movers until the closing has been secured. We've had borrowers who've done this. I have a borrower right now that it's taking forever and he's freaking out about the movers. And I'm like, buddy, you didn't listen to me. You gotta wait till you have a closing date. So because Rashida is very, very good at her job and working, because we work so much together, it's great that we do everything we can to get you the closing date you want. But there are a lot of people that need to be negotiated to get that date. And yeah, don't hire movers until you have a closing date.
We had a deal, do you remember last year, earlier this year, for Spencer Street, and she moved the movers like 3 times, even though I said don't schedule, but the market was just so crazy. She was so worried that she wasn't going to be able to get movers that she just wanted it booked in on the calendar. And so she kept on having to move it. And we felt so bad, but it was just new construction. And there just kept on being all of these things that were out of everybody's control besides the sellers to get us to the closing table. And that's just the risk you take with new construction. The timeline can just be extended. And there's lots of other things to be wary of for different types of deals. And that's why we went over a brief overview of the whole process, but there's a lot of nuances that we could get into if we talk to you more one-on-one and if we start working together. So in conclusion, then after all this happens, then you own a piece of property and then a whole other journey starts as a homeowner. If you work with me, and at Realty Collective, the resources we provide are access to Basecamp, which is a project management tool that I've created a library of resources for my clients that helps guide them through each step of the process and have those resources at their fingertips. And I can trigger them and be like, here, this is now, I want you to understand what's going to happen at the inspection, what we can ask for, what we're not going to ask for, and what some of the things that are typical that come up. We set up the search in Realty MX. We are also going to send you the homebuyer handbook. And if you want to schedule a call with any of us, just let us know. I think Farah is going to drop a link for my Calendly so you can book with me directly. Again, this presentation is recorded, so we're going to send it out after this. And we've tracked the questions you've asked so far that we're going to try to get through as quickly as possible because I know people are going to start dropping off soon. The one questions that I saw that I'm not sure if we asked, cost of inspection, anywhere from $500 to $1,200, depending on the size of the apartment. Yes, the cover letter is for the seller and the seller's broker. You also, if you're doing a co-op, you write a cover letter to the co-op board at that point, on top of all of your referral and references letters you have to get. Closing costs for a multifamily. Isn't that similar to a co-op, Rashida, 1 to 3% for multifamilies?
For multifamily, it's actually higher because you're going to have a higher mortgage tax. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking at, if it's a multifamily, you're probably looking at the higher end of the 5 or 6% because your mortgage tax is higher if you're getting a mortgage.
I'll update the presentation so it says on there, not just on co-ops and condos. Okay, I think those were all the questions that I saw. I'm going to look in the chat now to see if there's more questions. That's learn about buy a property in Brooklyn using an LLC. So maybe Rashida, you can answer that about buying property using an LLC. It's been tough finding HMLs and long-term rental loans.
Well, you definitely can buy a property buy a property with an LLC. Obviously, it's going to either, very rarely for a co-op, it's most likely going to be either a house or a condo. For the legal purposes, really, it's going to be about setting up the LLC, making sure you published, making sure all of those documentations are in place because the title company is going to want to have all of that documentation. For banking purposes, it may be a little bit different because they're probably going to want somebody who's the owner of the LLC to guarantee the loan. So Lisa can probably talk more about that. But yeah, you can definitely purchase a property in the name of the LLC for a co-op or a condo.
For mortgage purposes, there's sort of 2 ways to do it. So either way, you're going to be qualified based on your personal income, based on the personal individuals, whoever's going to be on the mortgage that are members of the LLC will be the ones that the income that we're using to be qualified. In terms of closing an LLC, you can do it. And it's not really an issue, but it's definitely something, if you want to do this as an LLC, that's something to lead in your conversation with me or a mortgage professional, because that determines the program you're going to use.
And he's asking specifically about the HMLs. And long-term rental loans? Did you already just?
I believe, Ryan, let me know if I'm wrong, but I think from your message that the HMLs and long-term rental loans would be for renting, or like purchasing for an LLC, you can do it just as a loan, either in your names or as an LLC loan, just like a regular loan. It just depends on the program.
And then Dana is asking about buying the apartment she's living in. Yes, you should definitely bring it up again with the owner. I think that it's a hard conversation to have. And if they're just holding out, they probably, there's probably tax reasons and other things that they're holding onto the property. I would need to know more about your specific situation. The rent to own, I mean, doing a rent to own usually isn't in the benefit of the seller unless you can pay like a premium on the rental. So if you're paying your rent right now is like $2,500 and you need help getting the down payment together or want to start working towards it, you can say, okay, well, I'll give you $3,500 a month and every $1,000 is going towards the down payment. But you still need to negotiate that and have it in writing with a lawyer. So, and then I don't know what the financing, if you already had a portion of the equity in the property, what that would look like for financing. Lisa,
Yeah, I would say for very rarely do you see a rent to own situation, because there's transfer tax issues for sellers that they just don't want to deal with when you enter into those type of agreements. But if you do see a property that you are in contact with the owner, you can't put that, if you have a lease, you can put an option to purchase and then put in, if you have a price already in mind, you can put that as an option in there. And then you can even put that a portion of you get a credit towards your down payment for maybe a certain amount. And then obviously your bank has certain amount of credits that they will allow, but you want to make sure that that's, complies with any banking guidelines. But you can put that, have an option in your lease that you have a right to purchase it, have a first right of refusal if they're putting it on the market, and then a portion can go a credit towards your closing costs, or credit towards the down payment for any of the money that you put in advance.
Just on the rent to own, that's pretty rare on the mortgage side. But I do loans for people who are buying from owners all the time. It's incredibly important that you have a good attorney, and title needs to be ordered right away, because a lot of times in this rent buying from owner situations, like sometimes there's an issue with title or something going on that is going to drag out the process. Doesn't mean it's a deal breaker, but that's just why you need a really good attorney, because you're going to need that extra help. Ryan, I just saw your question. So I get it. So Ryan wants to buy a multifamily home in his LLC and he's going to rent it out. That's just a regular loan. That's an investment property loan. If you're not living in one of the units, then it's considered an investment property because you're renting them all out. And doing it as an LLC, makes sense. That's something we can talk about in terms of what your options are. What you just need to know is if it's a multifamily home, it needs to be 4 units or less. Otherwise, it's a commercial loan. Those are possible, but that's sort of a totally different kettle of fish from what we are talking about on this call.
Yeah, this call is really for home ownership, for you to live in the property. If you're buying something as an investment interest rates are higher. And usually, some of them do require more than 20% down, and is not something that I focus in. I would say that I would probably refer you to another real estate broker as well, because an investment is not, I usually just work with people looking to purchase for their own home. Other questions in the chat before we wrap everything up? It was a pretty long presentation covering a lot of topics. So, and if we didn't answer your questions and you still want to talk to any of us, we could just jump on a call and go through the 1 or 2 things that you have concerned about, or start the process. And like I said, there's the link in the chat to start talking to us about next steps. And there is one more question. What about buying a multifamily, living in 1 unit and renting the rest out? Yes, you can do that. That's totally different than what Ryan is talking about, Lindsay. If you wanted to buy a multifamily, live in one of the units, then you could get a conventional loan, but not living in it would make it an unconventional loan. It would be an investment loan.
And you could potentially use some of the proposed rental income of one of the units to help you qualify.
Yep.
So again, that's something to talk about with me or with your mortgage professional when you're getting pre-approved. what you're thinking of doing, and we can talk about the numbers that way.
Yeah. So again, tons of resources to send out after this. So look for emails from Victoria or at info@realtycollective.com. It's coming through MailChimp, so it might end up in your spam box. So look over that. If there's any other questions, just reach out to us. And thank you everybody so much for your time today. I hope you found it informative.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.